With me, Caroline Flint, Minister of State for Employment. Alan Duncan, Shadow Secretary of State for Business. Sarah Tether, Liberal Democrat spokesman for Universities and Skills. The leader of the UK Independence Party, Nigel Farage. And top British businessman, former chairman of Marks and Spencer, Paul Miners, a close supporter of Gordon Brown and a financial donor to his leadership campaign.
The police now have been asked to investigate donations to the Labour Party. Can Gordon Brown survive, or Mr Bean soon become Mr Hasbro?
Well, you know, my party was embroiled in some difficulty over party funding earlier on this year. The Electoral Commission appeared to want to try and put us out of business because one of our donors hadn't filled in his electoral registration document on 1 year. But the judge made it clear we hadn't attempted to deceive in any way at all. But what fascinates me, Caroline, about your answer is this. It was your government that brought this legislation in. It brought it in to stop foreign and anonymous donors. That was perfectly clear when the Act came into being. But you've just said that you're going to give the money back. Who are you going to give the money back to? Is the jobbing builder, Ray Ruddick, going to find a couple of £100 back in his account?
Oh, don't be silly, Nigel.
Well, hang on, that's where the money came from. Is the lady that actually supports the Conservative Party going to find 25 grand in her account? And what about the legislation that you voted for that said...
Nigel.
Let me just get this clear. You, as a government, pushed through a piece of legislation that said if impermissible donations take place, that money must be forfeited.
Yeah,
not handed back to wherever it came from, or quite where it came from, of course, is still a mystery.
Where would it be forfeited?
Well, that's the odd thing, of course. It would go from Gordon Brown to Alistair Darling, which I know is fairly extraordinary. So, I mean, I really, you know, this idea the money's going to go back, it just doesn't work.
Well, one thing for sure, it won't be in Labour Party
But I have to
funds.
say, getting back to the question, that this whole premiership of Gordon Brown, it does begin to take on the air of a Shakespearean tragedy. And it may not be this issue that brings him down, but I think it's very unlikely that Gordon Brown will be the Labour Party leader at the next general election. The wheels have fallen off.
Paul.
I think we're losing the point here. You mentioned events, dear boy, events. I say chickens come home to roost.
Exactly.
And I think as far as Gordon Brown is concerned, he wasn't that good a Chancellor, and he can't cut it now. He's lost it, he should go.
We have proposed that there should be a cap of 50,000 quid on what anyone can give. And the reason we've suspended the talks is because the Labour Party refused to accept this same cap for trade union donations.
But Alan, you want state funding, and in fact...
No, we don't.
I mean, yes, you do.
No, oh, how?
Yes, you do.
You accept
state... Well, David Cameron, I'm sorry, your party leader, is very clear. The Queen's speech...
No, we don't want state funding.
You accept state funding is coming in. You've accepted it already. The Lib Dems have accepted it.
We don't want state funding.
You do want state funding.
Give it back.
All right.
But isn't the issue, Dave? Isn't the issue here?
Black is white, white is black.
One at a time, please.
We're in a very similar situation here to what happened in France in 1999 and 2000, where there was a huge scandal, huge furore over state funding. Over 1,000 officials found themselves convicted of embezzlement, and the French decided that to clean the whole thing up, they would introduce the state funding of politics. And I believe that the Queen's speech made it clear that's what's going to happen here, and all of you here, all the taxpayers, will be asked to bail out and in the future to support our political parties. I don't believe that should happen.
Nor do I.
Well, it's a fact. It's a fact.
Man on the front. Let's hear some more members of the man in the front here.
Completely a storm in a teacup when you consider that nearly 300,000 people have been killed in Sudan, and what have we done about that? I think we've got to put this into context.
Nigel Farage?
Yeah, well, that's absolutely right, isn't it? You would have thought the Sudanese government had bigger fish to fry than worrying about this letter. Perhaps a slightly insensitively worded letter that went out to the parents in that class. I'm sure this Miss Gibbons is a very, very good woman. I think what this whole case shows isn't so much insensitivity, getting back to your question. I think what it shows is there are very big differences between our values and the values in many of those Middle Eastern countries. And I think the message that comes out from this is don't accept a job in one of those countries unless you're absolutely sure you can abide by their customs. I most certainly would not take a job in a country where I couldn't have a drink after work, and I'm sure there'll be many people that will look at this case and think twice before going to work in the Sudan.
Did Alan Duncan support the gagging of Gerry Adams when his government was in power?
Exactly right. You know, that was one of the stupidest things we've ever seen, wasn't it? That for years Gerry Adams's voice couldn't appear on the television. It was a crazy thing to have done. I mean, full marks to the Oxford Union. I was there 2 weeks ago. I took part in a debate that was delayed by nearly an hour as they had a debate about whether Griffin and Irving should be invited or not. And I was very struck that those people that wanted to stop that debate happening were just keen to shout down, weren't prepared to even listen in respect to people whose views they may hold in contempt. And frankly, if we allow people to ban speakers in university, the next step is they'll be burning their books in university. We need to let free speech flourish, and there's no doubt. Does anybody think that David Irving convinced anybody in that audience towards his view on Monday? I doubt it.
Morrissey has suggested that the British identity is disappearing. Is he right?
This is the singer Morrissey, who lives in Rome, I think, and who said, although I don't have anything against people from other countries, the higher the influx into England, the more the British identity disappears. If you travel to Germany, it's still German. If you travel to Sweden, it still has a Swedish identity. If you travel to England, you've no idea where you are. Nigel Farage.
We've been a country that has, over the last 100 years, let's say, absorbed migrations into this country. We've been a refuge for asylum seekers. One thinks of Jewish people coming from Russia, coming from Germany. One thinks of what happened in Uganda in the early 1970s. And you think of all those things and you compare race relations in this country with the rest of Europe, and we've had a record of which we could be very, very proud indeed. We've actually been quite good at assimilating different groups of people into this country, until the complete and utter madness of what happened just 3 years ago, of totally opening up our borders to hundreds of millions of people living in very poor East European countries, and saying to them, as many of you who want to come and live in the United Kingdom as want to come can. And this was something that was supported by all three parties, voted for by all three parties. I'm pleased to say that UKIP were the only party to vote against it, because we made the argument, of course, immigration, if it's controlled, is a good thing for the country. Of course, we want people who can come and work here to have proper work permits. We're happy with that, but we do not believe in open border immigration. And I think what's happened in the last few years is that right across the UK, not just in the big cities, but in the small market towns and villages, people have seen a massive change. We're seeing social dislocation, we're seeing police chiefs, we're seeing school teachers, we're seeing people saying we simply cannot cope with an influx on this scale, and for many, many people, they're finding it quite difficult to recognise the neighbourhoods in which they live. And I do believe that we need to have a freeze on immigration into this country for a 5-year period.
Really?
For a 5-year period, and I'll tell you why. Because we'll have work permits, as I've just explained. But the reason for doing it is because we don't know, and David Blunkett admitted this, who's actually living in the country.
So,
we need to get a grip on this issue. We need to know who is living here, and in future we have to have proper controls of who is coming into the country and who is leaving the country. Let's get a grip.
Nigel, can I just be clear here?
Yes.
Are you saying no more immigration, or are you saying that you have some people in?
No. What I'm saying.
People, and how would you manage that? So why would you let some people in and not others?
Well, I can answer you. What I am saying is we'll operate work permits where people come.
So it's not a freeze on immigration.
We'll operate work permits. Work permits and rights of settlement are two entirely different things. Just look at British workers working in New York or Chicago.
So they could come and work, but if they have a family, they're never allowed to stay, no matter how much they contribute.
In terms of settling, I want us to have, my party wants us to have a 5-year freeze until we sort the mess out and find out who is actually here.